When the HOA Karen ripped my disabled daughter's nails out with pliers, she had no idea I was a deputy commissioner officer. Her smug smile disappeared when the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. Nobody hurts my Sophie and walks away. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more Karen stories. Daddy, am I broken? Those 4 words, whispered through tears by my 7-year-old daughter Sophie as we sat in the emergency room, will haunt me for the rest of my life. Her tiny fingers were wrapped in gauze, spots of blood seeping through the white bandages. The doctor had just stepped out to get more supplies, leaving us alone under the harsh fluorescent lights. No, baby, I told her, fighting back tears of my own. You're perfect. It's the world that's broken sometimes. I never imagined our quiet life in Meadowbrook Estates would turn into a nightmare. I never thought I'd have to explain to my disabled daughter why an adult would hurt her on purpose. And I certainly never expected that my position as deputy commissioner officer would become relevant to protecting my own child. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Michael Torres. 3 years ago, my wife Sarah died unexpectedly from an aneurysm, leaving me to raise our daughter Sophie alone. Sophie was born with cerebral palsy, which affects her mobility and requires her to use a wheelchair. Despite her physical challenges, she's always been a ray of sunshine, creative, determined, and endlessly kind. We moved to Meadowbrook Estates because of its excellent school district and accessibility features. Most of our neighbors welcomed us warmly, bringing over casseroles and offering help when they saw me struggling to balance my demanding job and single parenthood. Mrs. Kapoor next door became Sophie's after-school caretaker, picking her up from school when my work as deputy commissioner for the county's public works department kept me late at the office. Everything changed when Diane Blackwell was elected president of our homeowners association 6 months ago. A former real estate agent with perfectly styled blonde hair and an ever-present pearl necklace, Diane campaigned on a platform of restoring property values and community standards. What that really meant was making life miserable for anyone who didn't fit her narrow vision of suburban perfection. From day one, Diane had our house in her crosshairs. First came the notices about my lawn being half an inch too long. Then complaints about Sophie's colorful wind chimes creating noise pollution. Then citations about the wheelchair ramp we'd installed at our front door being an unauthorized modification. I tried reasoning with her. I explained Sophie's condition, showed her the medical documentation, even pointed out that denying reasonable accommodations for disabilities violated federal law. Diane would smile thinly and say, "Rules are rules, Mr. Torres. No exceptions." I should have fought harder then. Maybe if I had, what happened on that terrible Tuesday in April could have been prevented. That day, I was called away to handle a major sewer collapse downtown. Before leaving for work, I told Sophie I'd be home late and reminded Mrs. Kapoor that Sophie wanted to paint her nails after finishing her homework. My daughter loved nail art. It was one of the few fine motor activities she could do that made her feel like other little girls her age. Around 3:30 p.m. my phone rang. It was Mrs. Kapoor, her voice trembling. "Michael, come home now. That HOA woman, she's hurt Sophie. There's blood." I didn't even wait to hear the rest. I left my deputy standing in for me and raced home, my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. When I burst through the front door, the scene that greeted me turned my blood to ice. Sophie was curled up on the couch, sobbing silently in a way I'd never heard before. Mrs. Kapoor sat beside her, holding a bloodied towel wrapped around my daughter's hand. "What happened?" I demanded, rushing to Sophie's side. Mrs. Kapoor's face was ashen. "That woman, Mrs. Blackwell, she came to inspect the yard. I had gone to the bathroom for just a minute. Sophie was on the patio painting her nails. When I came back..." She paused, her voice breaking. "She had your toolbox open. She was using pliers on Sophie's fingers, saying the nail polish was against HOA rules and damaging property values." I couldn't process what I was hearing. "She did what?" "She pulled at Sophie's nails with the pliers," Mrs. Kapoor whispered. "2 of them are torn." Your daughter screamed and screamed, but that woman just kept saying she was enforcing the rules. I looked down at my daughter, who seemed smaller than ever. "Sophie, baby, is this true?" Sophie nodded, her chin quivering. "She said I was dirty and messy and making the neighborhood ugly. She said my fingers were against the rules." A fresh wave of tears spilled down her cheeks. "It hurts, Daddy." Something primal and protective roared to life inside me. But first, my daughter needed medical attention. I rushed Sophie to the emergency room, calling the police on the way. The doctor who examined her was gentle but visibly disturbed by what he saw. 2 of Sophie's fingernails had been partially torn from the nail beds. They were bleeding and would take weeks to heal properly. The doctor documented everything, taking photographs for medical records. That's when Sophie asked me if she was broken. That's when I promised her that no one would ever hurt her again. The police officer who met us at the hospital was initially dismissive. Sounds like an HOA dispute, he said with a shrug. We don't usually get involved in those. Without a word, I took out my wallet and handed him my county ID. I'm Michael Torres, Deputy Commissioner Officer for this county. What happened today wasn't an HOA dispute. It was assault on a disabled child. And I want to press charges. His attitude changed immediately. Yes, sir. I'll need statements from you, your daughter, and your neighbor. By the next morning, Diane Blackwell was arrested at her home. The look of shock on her face when officers appeared at her door was reportedly priceless. Do you know who I am? She demanded as they handcuffed her. Yes, ma'am, the arresting officer replied. You're the woman who assaulted the disabled daughter of Deputy Commissioner Torres. The news spread through our community like wildfire. By evening, our front porch was overflowing with flowers, cards, and homemade meals. Mr. Jensen, who I barely knew from 3 doors down, offered to mow my lawn every week. Mrs. Patel from the cul-de-sac, a retired nurse, volunteered to help with Sophie's bandage changes. Even Mr. Blackwell, Diane's husband, came by with tears in his eyes to apologize. I had no idea she could do something like this, he said, unable to meet my gaze. We're getting a divorce. I can't be married to someone who would hurt a child. The HOA board called an emergency meeting, where they unanimously voted to remove Diane from her position. The new temporary president, Mr. Rodriguez, immediately suspended all violation notices against our property and proposed new bylaws to accommodate residents with disabilities. But the community's response wasn't what surprised me most. It was Sophie. 3 days after the incident, as I helped her get ready for bed, carefully applying antibiotic ointment to her injured fingers, she said something that stopped me in my tracks. Daddy, I feel sorry for Mrs. Blackwell. I stared at her. You do? Why? Sophie considered this, her face serious. Because she must be really sad inside to be so mean outside. Happy people don't hurt other people. Out of the mouths of babes. The legal process moved swiftly. Diane was charged with assault on a minor, child endangerment, and violating the Americans with Disabilities Act. She tried to claim she was just enforcing community standards, and that Sophie's unauthorized nail polish was damaging property values. The judge was not impressed. Property values, he said during the hearing, do not supersede basic human decency or the law, Mrs. Blackwell. Diane took a plea deal that included community service at a center for children with disabilities, mandatory anger management classes, and a restraining order keeping her 500 feet away from Sophie and our home. The civil lawsuit that followed resulted in a substantial settlement that I put into a trust fund for Sophie's future medical needs. Our community changed after that day. The HOA still exists, but it's now led by a committee that includes parents of children with disabilities. They've established a neighborhood assistance program where volunteers help with yard work and home maintenance for families who need support. The first project they completed was building a sensory garden in the community park, with wheelchair-accessible paths and raised planting beds so Sophie could garden from her wheelchair. Diane Blackwell moved away after her divorce, but her ex-husband stayed. He's now one of Sophie's biggest supporters, volunteering at her school and advocating for better accessibility throughout the neighborhood. When I asked him why he stayed, he said, "Because I need to make amends not just to Sophie, but to the community I enabled my wife to hurt." 6 months have passed now. Sophie's fingernails have grown back, though one has a permanent ridge that will always remind us of that terrible day. But something else has grown too, a sense of belonging and protection that surrounds us like a shield. Yesterday, I watched Sophie sitting in the community garden, showing younger children how to plant sunflower seeds. Her fingers, once injured, now gently pressed seeds into soil. Her nails were painted bright yellow to match the flowers they were planting. "Look, Daddy," she called out, holding up dirt-covered hands. "I'm growing happiness." A crowd of neighborhood children clustered around her wheelchair, listening intently as she explained how deep to plant each seed. Parents stood nearby, smiling at the scene. Mrs. Kapoor caught my eye and gave me a thumbs up. That evening, as I tucked Sophie into bed, she asked me a question. "Daddy, are you still mad at Mrs. Blackwell?" I paused, considering my answer carefully. "I'm still angry about what she did to you," I admitted. "But I'm trying to focus on all the good things that came after." Sophie nodded wisely. "Like my garden and all my new friends and the nice rules instead of the mean ones." "Exactly like that," I agreed. She was quiet for a moment, her eyes drifting closed. Then she murmured, "Sometimes bad things have to happen so people notice what needs to be fixed." I sat there long after she fell asleep, thinking about her words. My 7-year-old daughter, wiser than I could ever hope to be. As Deputy Commissioner Officer, I've always believed in the power of rules and structures to create order. But Sophie has taught me that without compassion and flexibility, rules can become weapons. Now, when I review county policies and regulations, I always ask myself, how would this affect someone like Sophie? The HOA still sends out notices in our neighborhood, but they look different now. Instead of violations and threats, they include offers of assistance and accommodations. Instead of demanding conformity, they celebrate diversity. Last week, we held the grand opening of Sophie's Sensory Garden in the community park. Nearly everyone from the neighborhood attended. As Sophie cut the ribbon with her healed hands, the crowd erupted in applause. Mr. Rodriguez, now the permanent HOA president, presented Sophie with a plaque that reads, "For teaching us that true community is measured not by property values, but by how we care for our most vulnerable members." Sophie beamed, her smile lighting up her entire face. Later, as we headed home, she said something that made my heart swell with pride. "Daddy, I think I fixed something that was broken." "What's that, sweetheart?" I asked. "Our neighborhood. It was broken before, but now it's not." She was right, of course. Before Diane Blackwell pulled my daughter's nails with pliers, our community was just a collection of houses. Now it's truly a neighborhood, a place where people look out for each other, where differences are accommodated rather than punished, where my daughter can thrive without fear. As for me, I no longer hide my position as Deputy Commissioner. Instead, I use it openly to advocate for accessibility and inclusion throughout the county. Every policy I review, every regulation I enforce, is filtered through the lesson my daughter taught me. Rules without compassion aren't justice, they're just another form of cruelty. Sometimes at night, I still have nightmares about that day, about what might have happened if Mrs. Kapoor hadn't come back when she did, about how much worse Sophie's injuries could have been. But then I wake up to the sound of my daughter's laughter as she gets ready for school, her resilience washing away my fears. Diane Blackwell thought she could break my daughter that day. She never understood that Sophie's strength wasn't in her body, it was in her heart. And hearts like hers can never truly be broken. They only grow stronger, bigger, more compassionate. That's the real lesson in all of this. Sometimes the people we think need the most protection end up protecting us all. Sometimes the smallest hands plant the seeds of the biggest changes. And sometimes it takes a 7-year-old girl with cerebral palsy to teach an entire community what it really means to be neighbors.